6 a.m. February cold that bites straight through your jacket. A brand new white Lexus SUV, plate reading RULZGRL, sitting dead center in my winter wheat field. I'm standing there in mud-caked rubber boots, coffee steaming in my hand, my blue heeler grit growling slow circles around that car. The diesel rumble from my idling excavator cuts through the frost behind me. That thing costs more than my barn and tractor combined. Beverly steps out. No apology, no explanation. Just looks me up and down and says, smooth as honey,
"We just need to do a little surveying, Mr. Warden. This is for the good of the community."
2 years, 11 complaints, thousands in legal fees, all from the mouth of a woman standing on my land, uninvited, calling it the good of the community. I take a slow sip of coffee, glance over at the excavator bucket hanging right there, and I don't say a word. What would you do if you were standing in my boots right now? Drop it in the comments. And where are you watching from? Let me back up, because to understand why that Lexus ended up surrounded by a 3-foot drainage trench on a cold February morning, you need to know 2 things: who I am and who Beverly Pruitt is. My name is Colt Warden. I'm 58 years old, born and raised in Harlan County, Tennessee, and I have been working this 140-acre farm my entire adult life. My grandfather, Elwood Warden, bought the land in 1951 with money he'd saved working the railroad and a loan from a cousin in Knoxville. He grew tobacco and corn. My father expanded into Angus cattle in the 70s, added winter wheat rotation in the 80s. When he passed 11 years ago, he left me the land, a beat-up Kubota with a cracked manifold, and a handshake agreement with 2 neighboring farmers to share equipment during harvest. It is not glamorous. It is not a lifestyle brand. It is a working farm, and it smells like one. Diesel and turned earth in spring, dried hay and manure in fall, wood smoke and frozen mud in winter. I wouldn't trade a single acre of it. Now, the wrinkle. About 8 years ago, a developer called Ridgecrest Properties bought the old Tillman parcel, a 60-acre tract that borders my western fence line, and built a subdivision called Sunrise Estates. Nice enough houses, big 2-car garages, little decorative shutters bolted to the brick that don't actually shut anything. The Tillman family took the check and moved to Sarasota. I understood. Farming that parcel hadn't been profitable in years. The HOA that formed around Sunrise Estates, the Sunrise Estates Homeowners Association, or SEHA, was initially fine. A few polite letters about trash bins, nothing I was involved in, since my property predates the subdivision by 6 decades, and I have zero legal obligation to the HOA. Prescott Hale, my attorney, confirmed that in about 30 seconds the first time I mentioned it. Then Beverly Pruitt moved in. Beverly was a retired HR director from Nashville, relocated with her husband Thad, a quiet, slightly hollowed-out man who had the look of someone who had spent decades professionally agreeing. She was 62, always dressed like she was about to testify before a congressional subcommittee. Blazer, pressed slacks, sensible low heels, silver hair in a tight bun, phone perpetually ready to document alleged violations. She spoke in the measured cadences of someone who had spent 30 years writing performance improvement plans. She ran for HOA president 18 months after moving in. Nobody else wanted the job. She ran unopposed and won with 11 votes. Within 90 days, the letters started. Not to Sunrise Estates residents, to me. The first notice claimed my grain silo was an aesthetic nuisance, visible from the community walking trail. The silo had been standing since 1974. The walking trail was installed in 2019. The second notice cited my pre-dawn tractor lights as disruptive to residents' sleep cycles. I run lights during early harvests because harvesting has hours that don't wait for sunrise. This is not a new development in agricultural history. The third was a formal complaint to the county zoning board, signed by Beverly as HOA president, claiming my livestock operation constituted a nuisance property under a revised 2017 township ordinance. She'd actually done research, found an obscure amendment, and tried to turn it into a weapon. That complaint was dismissed. The zoning board had known my family since my father's time, but it cost me $800 in legal fees and 2 full days during calving season. The worst possible 2 days to be dealing with paperwork instead of cattle. I addressed Beverly directly at a county board meeting that spring. Politely, clearly, I told her my land rights were solid, my operations were lawful, and I'd appreciate it if she focused her considerable energy on the subdivision she was actually elected to govern. She smiled at me the way a chess player smiles when you move a piece you don't realize you shouldn't have. "Mr. Warden," she said, "every community has a character, and sometimes that character requires updating." That was 11 months before I found her car in my wheat field. Summer came in brutal that year, the kind of Tennessee July where the corn tassels go brown at the edges by noon, and the cattle stand hip-deep in the creek all afternoon just to stay sane. I was putting in 16-hour days, running on black coffee and habit, and the last thing I needed was the certified letter that arrived in late July from the county planning department. A formal application had been submitted requesting a mandatory vegetative buffer ordinance along my western property boundary. Translation: Beverly wanted to legally require me to plant a row of HOA-approved trees along my fence line, at my own expense, to block the view of my farm from Sunrise Estates. Estimated cost of the tree planting requirement: between $12,000 and $18,000. For trees I didn't want, on land I owned, purchased with my money, to hide my farm from people who chose to buy houses next to a farm. I read that letter twice at my kitchen table. It was 94 degrees and the window unit was struggling. The kitchen smelled like coffee grounds and axle grease. Grit was flat on the tile floor, one ear up, watching me with the mild concern dogs reserve for moments when their humans go very quiet. I set the letter down carefully, went outside, split a quarter cord of firewood before I picked up the phone. Old method, still works. Then I called Prescott Hale. Prescott had handled Warden family land matters since my father's time. 71 years old, drove a '09 Ford Ranger, charged rates that hadn't changed much since 2010. He had a memory like a courthouse filing cabinet and a very low tolerance for regulatory nonsense. "Colt," he said when I explained the buffer ordinance application, "that ordinance doesn't apply to agricultural land. The county code has an explicit agricultural exemption, Section 14-209, been on the books since 1998. Whoever filed this either doesn't know that or is betting you don't." Prescott filed a formal objection that week. The application was rejected at the County Planning Commission meeting in September. I attended. Beverly attended too, in her subcommittee blazer, and she watched Commissioner Dillard read the rejection aloud with an expression like she'd just discovered her coffee had been decaffeinated without her consent. I gave her a polite nod on the way out. She looked through me like I was a structural column. Takeaway: most rural counties have an agricultural exemption in their zoning code, protecting farm operations from ordinances designed for residential areas. Search Your County Agricultural Exemption Zoning. It's public record, and it costs nothing to look. Round one to the farm. But I'd made a mistake common to people who've just won something. I thought she'd recalibrate. 2 weeks after the Planning Commission ruling, my neighbor Dorrance Kimball called. Dorrance ran a peach operation on the eastern parcel. Third generation, laugh you could hear from the road, and absolutely no patience for foolishness. "Colt, you're going to want to hear this. That Pruitt woman has been going door to door in her subdivision with a petition. Says she's requesting a state agricultural review of your operation. Something about runoff concerns." I sat down on my porch steps. Evening smelled like honeysuckle and dry grass. Crickets were loud as a freight train. "A state ag review," I repeated. "Yeah, and Doran said she's been talking to people at the farmer's market, telling buyers you've got drainage problems, maybe chemical runoff into the creek." That hit differently than the zoning complaint. This wasn't bureaucratic friction anymore. This was my reputation. My family had farmed this creek watershed for 70 years without a single violation. My erosion controls were model level. I had documentation going back 15 years. But mud sticks, especially when someone's spreading it at the farmer's market where your regular buyers shop. I had two choices: react or get methodical. My grandfather used to say, "The man who keeps his head in a fight wins, because the other man usually loses his first." I went methodical. I called the Tennessee Department of Agriculture the next morning and requested a voluntary compliance inspection, something farmers can actually do proactively. You invite state inspectors onto your property, walk the land with them, document everything. If you're clean, they issue a signed compliance letter. Mine came back spotless. Signed, stamped, filed. I framed it, hung it in my equipment barn next to a 1955 photograph of my grandfather plowing this same field with a two-bottom plow and a mule named Senator. A voluntary compliance inspection from your State Department of Agriculture creates an official, dated record of your farm's clean status. It's a document that is very hard to argue with in any future regulatory or legal dispute. I also started keeping a written log. Every interaction with Beverly or SEHA. Date, time, content, my response. Old habit from a property line dispute I'd been through in my 40s. You keep a log, you always have the receipts. That log would become the spine of everything that came later. October rolled in with red maples and a cold snap that finally broke the summer's grip. I had winter wheat to plant, equipment to winterize before hard freeze, and a fence line on the north pasture that needed 4 new posts. I had about 0 margin for distractions. Beverly went after my access road. Along the western edge of my property, running parallel to the Sunrise Estates fence line, I have an unpaved farm road I use to reach my lower fields. About 400 yards of gravel and clay track, graded by my own equipment 30 years ago. My grandfather ran a wagon path along the same route before that. It sits entirely on my land, inside my fence line, by about 60 feet. Beverly had noticed that my trucks and tractors kicked up dust on that road. Dust that drifted east across the fence line on dry days. She had collected written statements from 4 Sunrise Estates residents claiming the dust was aggravating allergies and damaging vehicle paint finishes. She filed a private nuisance complaint with the county sheriff's office. Deputy Marvin Ogle, a man I'd known since he played third base in Little League, showed up at my door looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. "Colt, I'm real sorry about this. It's a complaint I'm required to log. You don't have to do anything right now. It just goes in the system." I thanked him. He left. I called Prescott. "A private nuisance claim for agricultural road dust," Prescott said, in the deliberate tone he uses when he's being careful not to editorialize. "It's technically not frivolous, but the legal standard for nuisance requires substantial interference with the use and enjoyment of property. Dust from a farm road that's been there 60 years, on land that was agricultural before that subdivision existed. That's going to be a very tough case under the coming to the nuisance doctrine." He explained, "When you move next to an existing operation and then claim it's a nuisance, courts in most states will look at the fact that the operation was there first. The farm predated the subdivision by decades. The road predated it by longer." Takeaway. The coming to the nuisance doctrine is a real legal defense recognized in most U.S. states. If someone builds or buys property adjacent to an existing operation and then files nuisance claims about it, the pre-existing operation often wins. Look it up before you respond to any complaint. The nuisance complaint was dismissed without action 3 months later, but it had cost me another $400 in legal consultation, and, more significantly, it had started to wear on my staff. I ran 3 part-time employees: my nephew Taft, a retired mechanic named Odell, who could diagnose an engine problem by sound alone, and Riva, who managed my books and records with the organized efficiency of someone who had missed their calling as a federal auditor. Riva pulled me aside one Tuesday morning, coffee in hand, voice low. "Colt, I need to say something. She's not stopping. Every few weeks, something new. And I heard from my cousin, she lives in Sunrise Estates, that Beverly has been talking at her Thursday community meetings about petitioning the county to rezone this entire area as rural residential. If that went through, it would affect your ability to run commercial agricultural operations here." I looked at her for a long moment. Riva didn't do drama. If she was bringing this to me, it was real. Where exactly did this come up? On the whiteboard, at the last session. Long-term community vision. It was apparently item 3. That reframed everything. This wasn't a neighbor with a grudge and a rule book. This was a coordinated strategy. Pile up enough regulatory complaints, enough reputational damage, enough legal costs, until the economics of farming this land stopped making sense, and I sold. And I had a very clear suspicion about who would be waiting with a purchase offer the moment I did. I started making quiet calls, not to complain, to research, and over the next few weeks, I started learning things about the connection between Beverly Pruitt and the Ridgecrest Properties Development Company that were very, very interesting. But before I could use any of that, Beverly made a move that pushed everything into open confrontation. She blocked my gate. On a Wednesday morning in early November, I arrived at my Western Field access gate to find a row of orange traffic cones and a hand-painted sign reading, "Road Closed. Environmental Survey in Progress." Next to the cones was a folding table with a clipboard, staffed by a young man in an orange safety vest, who was very clearly not a county employee. I stopped my truck, rolled down the window. Cold air, pine resin, the distant sound of a tractor idling somewhere on Dorrance's place. "What is this?" "Sir, this road is temporarily closed per HOA Environmental Review Guide." "Son, this road is on my private property. The HOA has zero legal authority here. Pack this up and leave, or I'm calling the sheriff right now." He left inside 4 minutes. Cones, table, clipboard, vest, and all. I got the sense the job had not been adequately described to him when he took it. I called the sheriff's non-emergency line anyway, got a report number, logged it, added it to the growing file. Keep your head, keep your records, my grandfather's rules. Still working, January. The coldest stretch in 4 years. The kind of cold where the ground rings like iron under your boot heels, and your breath hangs visible for a full second before it dissolves. I was running the excavator along the northern pasture most mornings, cutting the drainage ditch I'd been planning for 2 seasons. The diesel engine thumped and grumbled in the freeze. Hydraulic fluid has a sharp, mineral smell in cold weather that always means serious work is getting done. That's when Taft jogged across the field toward me with his phone held out, like he was carrying something fragile. "Uncle Colt, you need to see this." It was a public Facebook post in the Sunrise Estates community group. Public because Beverly always wanted maximum reach. It was an annotated screenshot of a Google Maps aerial view of my property, red circles and arrows drawn over my fields, outbuildings, creek access points. The post read, "Concerned neighbors. After extensive research, we have identified several potential environmental violations on the adjacent agricultural property. Documentation has been forwarded to the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation. We encourage all residents to observe and document any activity." 47 comments within 2 hours, most from Sunrise Estates residents. A few shared it to a regional environmental watchdog Facebook group. 2 people I recognized, farmers and business owners in the county, posted skeptical replies, but the reach was growing. I photographed Taft's phone screen. Then I called Reva and told her to start archiving everything. Every post, every comment, every share. Date stamped. Organized by date and platform. She had a folder structure built before I finished the sentence. Then I called Prescott. "Save everything," he said immediately, before I'd even finished describing it. "Every comment, every share. This is potentially your strongest piece of evidence. False statements of fact about a business, posted publicly, with apparent knowledge of their falsity. That's defamation per se in Tennessee. And if it's causing your buyers or vendors to question your operation, that's economic damage we can document." Takeaway. If someone posts false statements about your business or property on social media, screenshot everything immediately with visible timestamps and preserve all shares and comments. That documentation is the foundation of a defamation claim. And in most states, businesses can sue for actual and punitive damages. I also made a call I'd been sitting on for a month. I reached out to Glenwood Fitch, a reporter at the Cookeville Herald-Citizen, who'd done a well-regarded series the previous year on rural land rights and development pressure in the Cumberland Plateau region. I didn't pitch him a story. I invited him to come walk the property, review my compliance documentation, and meet Prescott. No agenda. Just, here's the situation. Here's the evidence. Here's what's been happening for 2 years. Glenwood drove out on a Thursday in late January. He spent 3 hours with us, walked the creek bank, read the Ag Department compliance letter, reviewed the dismissed complaints, and at one point, while we were standing at the western fence line, looking at the Sunrise Estates rooftops through the bare winter trees, he said something deliberately casual. "You know, Ridgecrest Properties has been in contact with the county about expanding Sunrise Estates. Phase 2 would require additional land." I kept my face neutral. And they've made a preliminary inquiry about your parcel? I've heard that, he said, in that careful journalist non-answer that means yes. There it was, laid out plainly by someone who had done his own digging independently of mine. Beverly Pruitt wasn't just a difficult neighbor with an HOA title and a rule book. She was, wittingly or not, I still don't know which is worse, serving as a pressure agent for a real estate developer who needed my 140 acres to build phase 2 of their subdivision. Every complaint, every filing, every defamatory Facebook post was a calculated move to make the economics of this farm unsustainable. The excavator's diesel grumbled behind me in the cold. I thought, they picked the wrong farm. Prescott called me on a Friday afternoon in late January with a voice I hadn't heard from him before. Deliberate, slow. The voice of a man who is holding something explosive and wants to set it down without dropping it. Colt, I've been running a title search on the Sunrise Estates development parcel, the original Ridgecrest Properties filing from 2016. And I found something in the development agreement that I don't think anyone has looked at since it was recorded. I sat down at the kitchen table. Grit put his head on my knee. The development agreement between Ridgecrest and Harlan County, public record at the county recorder's office, contains a maintenance covenant on the shared utility easement along your western boundary. Standard language. But attached to that same filing is a 10-year non-harassment clause. It states that Ridgecrest Properties, its subsidiaries, agents, assigns, and any HOA operating within the development are prohibited from initiating any regulatory, legal, or administrative action against adjacent landowners within the agricultural buffer zone for a period of 10 years from the date of development completion. I set the phone down on the table, picked it up again. Prescott, are you telling me that Beverly, operating as president of a Ridgecrest HOA, has been filing complaints against me in direct violation of a non-harassment clause that Ridgecrest itself signed? That is exactly what I'm telling you. And the 10-year period doesn't expire until 2026. The silence between us was the kind that has real weight. Every zoning complaint, every nuisance filing, every planning application, every defamatory Facebook post, all of it, potentially, constituted a breach of a contract that Ridgecrest Properties had signed with the county as a condition of development approval, which meant I had a potential breach of contract claim against a real estate developer with very deep pockets, stacked on top of 2 years of documented defamation and harassment. Prescott explained that this kind of provision is sometimes called a peaceful use covenant, or a covenant not to harass adjacent landowners. Enforceability varies by state, but Tennessee courts had upheld similar language in 2 recent cases involving agricultural buffer zones. Takeaway. When a developer builds adjacent to farmland, they often agree to peaceful use covenants as a condition of county development approval. Those agreements are public record at your county recorder's office. If an HOA tied to a development is harassing you, have an attorney pull the original development agreement. You may find they've already agreed not to do exactly what they're doing. Then Prescott said the thing that required me to sit very still for a moment. Don't use this yet. Don't file anything. Don't even mention it to her. Every additional complaint she files from this point forward is another documented breach. Every new act is more money. Let her keep going. She'll hand us the case. Patient as a fence post in January. That's what this required. I went back to work, kept the log, kept the evidence folder, waited. Beverly, true to form, did not disappoint. February on a Tennessee farm is the ugliest month. Ground frozen or near frozen most mornings. Cattle burning through hay at double the summer rate. No harvest rhythm to carry you, just maintenance, planning, and the cold, methodical work of preparing for spring. It's also, paradoxically, the best time to think clearly. No distractions, just you, the cold, and the problem in front of you. I had the legal case building. Documented defamation, breach of a development covenant, 2 years of dated logs, archived social media posts, sheriff's report numbers, dismissed complaints, all organized by Riva into a binder that was starting to look like a court exhibit. I had Glenwood Fitch quietly building his own parallel file from the journalism side. What I needed now was an endgame, not just a settlement, not a quiet check and a confidentiality clause, a public, documented, permanent resolution. The kind where the full picture becomes part of the county record, and everyone in this community understands exactly what was attempted here and exactly how it ended. Dorrance came over on a Sunday evening, and we sat on my porch with coffee and talked it through. Dorrance had been farming since before I was in high school and had navigated 2 serious boundary disputes in his career. He had the kind of wisdom that comes from having been genuinely wrong before and adjusted accordingly. "You've got the legal angle solid," he said, "but courts take years, settlements go quiet. You want her to stop, and you want people to know why she stopped. Those are different problems, and they need different solutions." He was right. A settlement negotiated by lawyers in a conference room, sealed with a confidentiality agreement, solved my immediate problem and left Beverly free to run the HOA indefinitely, having paid a modest sum that Ridgecrest's insurance probably covered anyway. What I needed was a moment. A single, visible, public, undeniable moment that would do 3 things simultaneously: document her trespass beyond any dispute, demonstrate that my legal position was unassailable, and make the full scope of her 2-year campaign impossible to minimize or spin. And I needed her to create that moment herself, without any prompting from me. She was already trying to do exactly that. Reva's cousin, who lived in Sunrise Estates and had been quietly feeding us information for months, not out of disloyalty to her neighbors, but out of a genuine sense that things had gone wrong, reported that Beverly had been surveying my property boundary from inside the subdivision fence line, taking photographs, measuring. Taft had spotted a faint tire track inside my western gate 2 weeks earlier that he hadn't been able to explain. She was planning something that required measurements of my land, and she was going to need to come onto my property to get them. I walked the south field on a Sunday morning, thinking through the geometry. The drainage ditch project I'd been cutting since January ran along the northern edge of that field. Entirely legitimate, planned for 2 seasons, part of a county-approved watershed management plan I'd filed 3 years prior. The ditch was scheduled to extend south, toward the field's lower corner, in the coming weeks. Routine farm work, documented in the plan. The south field gate, where Taft had seen the tire track, was the natural access point for anyone surveying my western boundary, on foot or in a vehicle. I did not set a trap. I want to be precise about this because precision matters legally and it matters to my conscience. I scheduled my drainage work to proceed according to the approved plan. I ensured my gate was operational but not locked, consistent with my standard practice. I informed Prescott of my intentions. He reviewed the situation and confirmed that a landowner conducting scheduled, documented farm work on his own property, even if that work happens to have consequences for an unauthorized vehicle parked on that property, is well within his rights, provided the work was genuinely planned and not improvisational. It was genuinely planned. The excavator was already out. The ditch plan was already filed. This was February farm work, the same as any other year. Then I called Glenwood Fitch, not to tip him to a story, just to mention that I was doing some interesting drainage work on the south field this week, and that given the ongoing situation he'd been covering, he might want to come document the agricultural operations for his files. Glenwood said he'd be there Tuesday morning. I texted Prescott. Week of the 12th, South Field Drainage, Phase 2, everything documented. He texted back 2 words, "I know." I went to bed early. February nights on a farm. When the work is done and the planning is done, and all that's left is to execute. Those are actually some of the most peaceful nights of the year. She came on a Sunday morning, February 9th. Taft was out early checking cattle water in the south pasture when he spotted the Lexus, parked inside my western gate, on the grass beside the access lane, engine off, no one visible yet. He called me at 6:02 a.m. I was already up, already dressed, already had the excavator's preheat running. I drove the truck down to the south field, parked, got out. The air smelled like frozen clay and distant wood smoke. Grit jumped down from the passenger seat and immediately began his slow professional circles around the Lexus, head low, not barking, just cataloging. I photographed the vehicle, multiple angles, my property markers clearly visible in every frame. The gate, the fence line, the tire tracks in the frost, timestamp running. Then I called the sheriff's non-emergency line and filed a trespassing report. Got a report number, logged it. Then I texted Glenwood. "Today's the day, South Field. Bring your camera." He arrived at 7:15 a.m. and set up at the fence line with a long lens. Unobtrusive, just documenting, which is what journalists do. I climbed into the excavator and went to work. I'm going to be very clear about what happened next, because I know how this sounds, and I want no ambiguity. I did not touch her vehicle. I did not damage her vehicle. I did not even approach her vehicle with the machine. Destruction of property is a crime, and it's not in my character, and it was never the plan. What I did was continue the drainage ditch project I had been cutting since January, following the approved watershed plan, extending the trench southward along the scheduled route, which happened to run in a wide arc around the area where her vehicle was parked. By 9:30 a.m., the Lexus was not buried, but it was enclosed on 3 sides by a freshly cut drainage trench, 3 feet deep, with turned clay piled in clean ridges along the edges. The 4th side, behind the car, was soft, turned earth from the entry cut. Getting that vehicle out under its own power was not happening. Getting a tow truck in would require crossing my field with heavy equipment, which required my permission. Odell watched from the equipment barn with his arms folded and an expression of deep professional satisfaction. "Legal?" he asked. "Legal," I confirmed. "Scheduled drainage work on private property. The vehicle was already here when I started. Owner can retrieve it at her convenience. She'll just need a tow." At 10:47 a.m., I sent Beverly a text message. "Ms. Pruitt, your vehicle appears to be parked on my private property without permission. I filed a trespassing report with the sheriff's office this morning. Report number available on request. The vehicle is accessible, but will require a tow truck for extraction due to active drainage work in the area. I recommend Lester's towing on Route 9. Please arrange retrieval at your convenience." She arrived at 11:15 a.m., with Cortland and Peg from the SEHA board, in Thad's pickup, apparently thinking a tow strap and a strong truck would handle the situation. They climbed out and stood at the edge of the trench, looking at the Lexus for a long, quiet moment. Beverly turned to look at me across the ditch. "You did this deliberately." "I'm doing scheduled drainage work on my property, Ms. Pruitt. I have the county-approved watershed plan filed 3 years ago if you'd like to see it. Glenwood Fitch from the Herald-Citizen photographed your vehicle's position at 7:15 this morning, before any excavation work began. The trespass report was filed at 6:08 a.m. She turned to Cortland. He was already on his phone. Peg was staring at the trench with the expression of someone reviewing a series of decisions that had led to this moment. Lester's tow truck arrived at 12:30. Lester himself assessed the situation, with the unhurried evaluation of a professional, calculating a premium rate. It took 45 minutes, a secondary vehicle for counterweight, and 2 passes with the winch. The bill, from what Taft overheard Cortland mention on his phone afterward, was $380. Glenwood was still at the fence line when the Lexus finally cleared the trench. He lowered his camera, made a note in his pad, and gave me a small nod across the field. That evening, Beverly posted on the Sunrise Estates Facebook group. She called it deliberate rural intimidation. She said she was consulting legal counsel. She used the word assault in a way that suggested she wasn't entirely clear on its legal definition. The first reply came from Wallace, a part-time resident who'd grown up on a cattle farm in Missouri. "With respect, Beverly, you parked on the man's private farm without asking. I'm not sure what outcome you were expecting." It got 41 likes inside an hour. Cortland deleted his supportive comment. Peg went offline. The coalition was cracking. Beverly's legal counsel turned out to be a Knoxville attorney named Duffy, HOA specialist, polished, expensive, clearly accustomed to walking into rural county disputes and finding the other side unrepresented or underprepared. He was about to have an educational experience. Prescott had formally requested a mediation pre-conference, not legally required, purely strategic. Get Duffy in a room. Let him hear the full scope of the claim. Watch his face as the cards come out one at a time. The pre-conference was held at the county building on a Tuesday morning. Prescott and I arrived early. Duffy arrived with a leather portfolio and the practiced ease of someone who charges by the hour and assumes rural Tennessee presents minimal complexity. Prescott opened with the harassment log. 2 years, 11 documented complaints, all dismissed, all with associated legal costs. Duffy nodded along in the measured way of a professional taking notes. Then Prescott put the covenant on the table. He slid the certified copy of the Ridgecrest Development Agreement across the table, flagged, tabbed, with the non-harassment clause highlighted in yellow. He let Duffy read it, didn't say anything while he read, just let the document speak. Duffy read it once, then read it again, more slowly. Then he requested a 5-minute recess. The recess lasted 23 minutes. Taft, who was present for documentation purposes, said the hallway sounds included at least 2 phone calls and a period of extended silence. When Duffy returned, the leather portfolio was still open, but his posture had changed. He was no longer leading. Prescott was. "My client was not made aware of this provision," Duffy said carefully. "That's a matter between your client and Ridgecrest Properties," Prescott replied. "What concerns us is that 11 documented actions were taken in direct violation of a binding covenant. Ridgecrest has been copied on all correspondence as of this morning." Beverly, sitting 2 chairs from Duffy, kept her face arranged in careful neutrality. Thad, who had come after all, sat at the far end of the table and studied his hands. Prescott read from his prepared statement. "Our terms: immediate cessation of all SEHA actions directed at my property. Formal public retraction of the defamatory social media post. A negotiated settlement covering 2 years of documented legal fees and losses, and a written reaffirmation from Ridgecrest Properties, recorded at the county recorder's office, of the non-harassment covenant for its remaining term." Duffy asked for 2 weeks. "1 week, Prescott said. "The rezoning petition is on the County Board of Supervisors' agenda for the 14th. I'd prefer to resolve this before that hearing becomes part of the public record, with our full documentation attached as a formal response." That last piece, the rezoning petition, was the detail that had changed the temperature of everything. Beverly had filed it on the same day her car was on my property, simultaneously conducting a trespass and a formal county petition. The petition was already a public document. If it went to a public hearing without withdrawal, Prescott's full file, the covenant breach finding, the defamation documentation, the dismissed complaints, all of it, would become part of the permanent county record. Ridgecrest Properties attorneys, who had apparently been making calls to Duffy throughout his 23-minute recess, did not want that. A publicly recorded finding that their HOA had spent 2 years violating a covenant they'd signed with the county was not a document they wanted attached to their Phase 2 development application. Takeaway: when an HOA or developer files a formal petition against your property, it becomes a public document. Your counter-documentation, filed as a formal response, also enters the public record permanently. That leverage is real. Use it. On the way out, Thad held the door open for me without looking up. "Thank you," I said. He gave the smallest nod. A man communicating volumes with 2 millimeters of movement. 4 days later, Duffy called Prescott. Beverly was ready to negotiate settlement terms. The clock had run out. The Harlan County Board of Supervisors meeting on February 14th was scheduled as a routine session. Budget line items, a road repair authorization, standard municipal business that usually draws 20 people to the community center on a Thursday evening. Because of the rezoning petition public notice, and because Glenwood's preview piece in the Herald-Citizen had run that Wednesday under the headline, "Farm Owners' Land Rights at Center of 2-Year HOA Dispute," the Harlan County Community Center had approximately 140 people in it when I walked through the door at 6:45 p.m. Folding chairs borrowed from the Methodist Church lined 3 walls. The room smelled like drip coffee from the percolator in the corner, and wet winter coats, and the specific electric atmosphere of a community that has decided collectively that something matters. People I hadn't seen in years were there. Former neighbors, farmers from the eastern part of the county, business owners from the main street. Dorrance was in the second row. Odell was in the back. Reva had her binder on her lap. Prescott wore his one suit. He looked like what he was, a man who had been doing this for 50 years and had seen how it ends when you prepare correctly. Beverly was in the front row with Cortland, not with Thad. Her posture was composed, hands folded, expression arranged in the careful blankness of someone who has received legal advice to project calm. What Beverly did not know, what I had not told her, what the settlement terms had required her to agree to without fully understanding its implications until she was sitting in that room, was that the withdrawal of the rezoning petition had to be made formally, verbally, on the public record, at this meeting, before the board, before 140 people, before Glenwood and his camera. Duffy had pushed back on the public withdrawal requirement. He'd wanted a written filing, done quietly through the county clerk's office. Prescott had been unmovable. His exact words, as Taft reported them. This petition was filed publicly, announced publicly, and used to damage my client's reputation publicly. It needs to be withdrawn publicly, on the record, in the same forum where this community's business is conducted. That is not negotiable. Duffy had relayed this to Beverly. She had agreed rather than face the alternative. Now she was sitting in the front row of a room with 140 people in it, and she knew what was coming. The meeting opened. Routine items moved with unusual speed. I got the impression the board members also knew what this room was here for. When Supervisor Holt Braddock, a cattleman in his 60s who had known my father and had the unhurried authority of someone elected 7 times without significant opposition, called the rezoning petition agenda item, the room went quiet in the particular way of people who have been waiting. The board has received notice of a withdrawal request from the petitioner. Ms. Pruitt? Beverly stood. She had prepared remarks. You could hear the structure of them, the careful word selection, the attempt to frame what was happening as a strategic choice rather than a defeat. She said that after further reflection and consultation, she was withdrawing the petition, as she believed the community's long-term interests were best served by focusing on internal HOA governance rather than external regulatory matters. It was crafted to sound gracious. It landed like what it was. Supervisor Braddock nodded once. Petition withdrawn. For the record, the Warden agricultural parcel remains classified as agricultural use, consistent with its designation since 1951. He didn't have to add that last part. He chose to. The room let out a breath. Not a cheer. This was a county government meeting, not a ball game, but a real, collective exhale. The sound of something that had been pressing against people for 2 years releasing all at once. Glenwood was in the back with his notepad open and a photographer beside him. The Herald Citizen piece that ran the next morning led with a photograph taken outside the community center afterward. Me, Dorrance, and Prescott standing in the parking lot in our winter coats, looking like 3 men who had just finished a long day's work and were glad it was done. I spoke to Glenwood for about 10 minutes. I said what I'd been carrying for 2 years. This land belonged to my grandfather and my father, and now it belongs to me, and eventually it'll belong to whoever in this family comes after me. It grows things. It's been doing that since 1951, and I intend for it to keep doing that. I'm not a difficult person. I don't enjoy conflict, but I'm not selling and I'm not moving. And anyone who spends 2 years filing false complaints against a family farm and then parks their car on it without permission is going to find out that I am patient. I keep good records, and I know a very good attorney. Quoting you on all of that? Glenwood asked. Please, I said. The settlement was finalized in March. Specific financial terms are covered by a partial confidentiality agreement, so I won't give you numbers. What I can tell you is that my documented legal fees were covered in full, with additional compensation for losses and disruption. Ridgecrest Properties issued a formal written reaffirmation of the Peaceful Use Covenant, recorded at the county recorder's office as a public document, binding through the full remaining term. That document is publicly accessible today to any adjacent landowner who wants to look it up. The defamatory Facebook posts were removed and replaced with a formal public retraction posted by the SCHA board, not by Beverly, because Beverly had resigned as HOA president 3 days after the county board meeting. The new president was Wallace. He called me the week after his election. Mr. Warden, I want you to know that the majority of people in this community had no part in what happened, and no knowledge of the extent of it. We'd like to start over with you, if you're willing. I told him what was true. My problem had never been with Sunrise Estates residents. It had been with a specific campaign, run by a specific person, in service of a specific real estate agenda. He understood. We shook hands. The Pruitts listed their house in April. I don't know where they went, and I find I have very little curiosity about it. Ridgecrest Properties is currently under review by the county attorney's office for the covenant breach, specifically whether the documented HOA actions constitute violations of the development agreement they signed with the county in 2016. That review is ongoing and part of the public record. If you want to follow it, search Harlan County Public Records, Ridgecrest Properties, Covenant Review. Here is the part of this story I'm most proud of. In April, Prescott and I had a conversation about the settlement funds beyond what was needed to cover legal costs. I'd been sitting with an idea since January, since those cold evenings in the equipment barn when the planning was happening, And I've been thinking about what this fight was really about. It wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. It was about whether a family farm, the kind that's been feeding communities and employing neighbors and maintaining land that nobody builds on and nobody paves over, gets to keep existing. Whether the next generation has a reason and a path to come back to this work. We established the Warden Agricultural Scholarship, administered through the Harlan County Community Foundation. It funds 2 students from the county annually, priority given to children of farm families, to attend the University of Tennessee College of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources. Full in-state tuition for 1 year, renewable on academic standing. The first 2 recipients were announced in May at the County Extension Office's spring meeting. A 19-year-old from a cattle family in the eastern part of the county who wants to come back and run her family's operation, with a livestock management degree. A 17-year-old whose family runs a small orchard and apple press, who wants to study agricultural business. Both of them shook my hand and thanked me. I told them what my grandfather would have told them. The land doesn't owe you anything. You work it, you respect it, you leave it better than you found it. Everything else follows from that. It's May now. The winter wheat came in strong. Good color, good weight. The drainage ditch is working exactly as designed. The cattle are fat on spring grass. The tow truck marks in the south field are almost completely grown over. Grit sleeps under my truck in the evenings while I finish paperwork on the porch. The subdivision lights are on across the fence line. Most of my neighbors over there wave when they see me on the road. The excavator is back in the barn where it belongs, for now.